All right, welcome to another deep dive. And today we're going deep into the case of Andrew Cunanan. Now, we've got a ton of research here, our own notes, and we're going to really try to understand this guy. I mean, from his background to his, well, the crimes, those horrific crimes.
Yeah, it's interesting to see how his seemingly normal early life, contrasts with what he ended up doing. It's like a puzzle with some pieces missing, really.
Exactly. Like, how does someone go from being born in National City, California, going to a great school, testing with an IQ of 147? 147, and even being voted, get this, most likely to not be forgotten by his classmates.
Wow.
Yeah, so how does that happen? How do you go from that to the path he ended up on?
Well, that's where, that whole nature versus nurture debate comes into play. Was there something already there, or was it his experiences, nature being like the genetics you're born with, right?
Yeah.
And nurture being like everything you go through in life.
Right, right. Okay. So, but even early on, there are these signs that things weren't quite what they seemed. He was known for being a great storyteller, but a lot of it was made up, especially stuff about his family. Like he was creating an image, even then, like especially to attract wealthy, older men.
Yeah, and that kind of, I guess, that tendency to create a facade, it just got stronger as he got older. He drops out of college, ends up in San Francisco's Castro district,
Yeah.
and he's still going after those relationships with those wealthier men.
Mm.
It's like he was driven by this need for a certain lifestyle.
Okay, here's where things get even more interesting. So his dad actually ticks off, abandons the family to avoid some embezzlement charges, and then his mom finds out about his sexuality. And there's this incident, a violent one, where he actually dislocates her shoulder. I mean, could this be a turning point? Did all of this push him further down a really, really bad path?
Yeah, I mean, it's possible. Trauma like that, especially at that age, it can really mess with your development, psychologically.
Hmm.
And some research suggests that maybe Cunin was showing signs of antisocial personality disorder.
Yeah.
And that often comes with, a lack of empathy, a lack of remorse.
Okay, so we've got this guy. He's becoming more and more unstable. He's living on the edge. And then the murders begin. The first victim is Jeffrey Trail, an ex-Navy officer. Someone Kinnan actually knew, considered a friend. He's found brutally murdered in Minneapolis. And the murder weapon, a hammer. And not just any hammer, a hammer stolen from Trail himself. I mean, how much rage does it take to kill a friend with that level of brutality?
Right. I mean, that's the question that really hangs over this entire case.
Hmm.
Why that much violence? Why choose a weapon that had a connection to the victim? It seems like there's something more there, something deeper. Was there some kind of personal grudge we're missing, or some motive that only Cunin understood?
And then comes the second murder. David Madsen, an architect Cunin was involved with romantically. He's found dead, shot. But there's evidence that he might have been held hostage before he was killed. Could something like Stockholm Syndrome be involved here, where a hostage starts to, identify with their captor? Was Madsen forced to go with Cunanan?
Hostage situations are so complicated. The psychology of it all is just, it's so nuanced. It's possible we'll never really know if Madsen went willingly or if he was just terrified and trying to survive.
And the next murder, it takes a really strange turn. Cunanan goes to Chicago and kills Lee Miglin, a really wealthy real estate developer. And this is where things get even more confusing, because there's just no clear connection between them at all. Miglin was found bound, tortured, and he'd been stabbed multiple times. It seems so personal, but the link to Cunanan is just a mystery.
Yeah, this is one of those cases where the why, it's just as confusing as the who. We know Cunanan was great at lying, creating fake identities, but what would be the motive for going after Miglin? Was it just random, or is there something darker we haven't figured out yet?
And then it's like he just gets desperate. He murders William Reese in New Jersey. Reese was just a caretaker at a cemetery. Cunanan killed him for his car, basically. It feels like everything's shifting, like he's just trying to disappear.
Yeah, you can see that need to just get away, and maybe that growing paranoia, too. He's on the run, his crimes are all over the news, and, well, things are closing in. This murder, unlike the others, seems to be driven by just pure need to escape.
And then finally, this is the murder that really put Cunanan in the spotlight, the one that everyone remembers, the
Yeah.
murder of Gianni Versace. This wasn't just a murder, it was an execution. Versace, a world-famous fashion designer, he was shot right on the steps of his own mansion in Miami Beach.
The whole world was in shock. I mean, Versace was an icon, a symbol of, style and success. And his murder just sent shockwaves through everything. It really put the pressure on to catch Cunanan. But the question was, Why Versace?
Exactly. Yeah. Oh, was it just a random act? Was Cunanan trying to like become famous or something? Or was there some deeper connection between them that nobody knew about? We're going to dig into that a bit later.
It's the biggest question surrounding this case. There were a lot of rumors, but nothing concrete has ever really surfaced to explain that connection, that link between Cunanan and Versace.
And then, just days after Versace's murder, another twist. Cunanan is found dead. On a houseboat in Miami, he'd killed himself. No note, no explanation, no confession, just more questions, more mysteries.
Yeah, his suicide just added another layer to an already incredibly complex case. It left everyone, investigators, the public, just grappling with that why. Why those horrific acts and why take his own life in the end? We may never really know the full story.
So, we got this timeline, right? But it still feels like we're missing like half the pieces of the puzzle. I mean, you've got a former Navy officer, an architect, a real estate developer, a cemetery caretaker, and a world-famous fashion designer. What's the connection? Like, how do all these victims fit together?
It's true. It is a really, really strange mix of people. And that's one of the things that makes it so hard to figure out, like, one motive, one thing that connects all the murders. Some experts have said that maybe Cunanan had a serious personality disorder, maybe even psychopathy that could explain, why he didn't seem to have any empathy, why he was so cold-blooded, and why he never seemed to, show any remorse.
It's true, there is this really chilling detachment to everything he did. Like, it was all a game to him. And these victims, they were just, I don't know, pawns to be sacrificed or something. And then, of course, he kills himself before he has to face any consequences. I mean, did he ever feel guilty? Did he ever regret anything? It's like he took those answers to the grave with him.
Right. It's just so many unanswered questions. And I think that's what keeps people fascinated by this case even now. I mean, there have been tons of books, documentaries. There was even a TV show all about Cunanan. People are just drawn to the mystery of it all.
Yeah.
The horror of it. It's hard to look away.
It's true. There's something about, I don't know, about true crime that just captures our imagination. It's like looking in a dark mirror. It forces us to think about the fact that these things really happen, these dark impulses. They're part of being human, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. And in this case, there's this extra layer. Because of the connection to Gianni Versace, Versace wasn't just some designer. He was an icon, a symbol of, beauty, success, everything. To have his life cut short like that, so brutally, by someone like Cunanan, it doesn't make sense.
And it was like suddenly nobody felt safe anymore. Not even the rich and famous. It was like nobody was untouchable. But I want to talk about the way the media was portraying Cunanan during the manhunt. They kept talking about him as this master manipulator, a chameleon, someone who could blend in anywhere.
Yeah, right. There were all these reports about how smart he was, how charming he was, how charismatic.
Yeah.
And he was able to gain people's trust.
Yeah.
Makes them feel comfortable. And then just use them. Like he could read people. Like he could figure out what made them tick and then use that against them.
And that's how he stayed ahead of everyone for so long. Always one step ahead, blending in, disappearing before anyone could catch him.
Which brings us back to the question of motive. Was it all about power, control? Did he want to prove something, leave his mark on the world, even if it was a mark of, violence and destruction?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say for sure, but there's something to that, right? I mean, we know he was obsessed with status, with wealth, with being seen, being admired. Maybe in some really twisted way, this whole killing spree was his way of making a statement, his way of becoming infamous, I guess.
It's a chilling thought.
Yeah.
But it makes sense given, how incredibly narcissistic he seemed to be.
The ironic thing is he did achieve a level of notoriety that most people can't even imagine, but it's tied to these horrible crimes forever. He'll be remembered, but not for the reasons he probably wanted.
He leaves behind this legacy of pain, of loss, and just endless questions. And I think that's the most tragic part of the whole thing. We may never really understand, what drove him, what he was struggling with, but I guess we can try to learn from it, try to make sense of the senseless.
So where do we go from here? We've talked about his past, his possible motives, the victims, the media circus. But what can we, as individuals, take away from a case like this? Is it just some morbid fascination with this dark part of history? Or is there something, I don't know, something valuable we can learn from looking at the darkest parts of the human psyche?
Yeah, it's easy to get lost in, the mystery of it all, trying to figure him out, but we can't forget about the victims, the families. I mean, their lives were changed forever. by what Cunanan did and the pain they went through. It's hard to even imagine.
Absolutely. We're, fascinated by the psychology and trying to understand it all, but it's so important to remember these were real people. Real lives were lost. And we owe it to them to remember them,
Yeah.
to learn from this. But what can we actually learn, from a case this messed up and this complicated? It's easy to just say, oh, Cunanan was a monster, someone so different from us that we could never, do what he did. But doesn't that kind of let us off the hook? I mean, it lets us ignore that dark side of human nature and pretend that, we're somehow immune to those same impulses that drove him.
That's such a good point. I think one of the biggest lessons here is that evil, it's not always easy to spot. It doesn't always, look like a villain in a movie. It can hide behind a smile, behind charm, behind like a really well-constructed act. It can be, right next door, hidden in plain sight.
So how do we protect ourselves, protect the people we care about from that kind of like hidden darkness?
Well, I think it starts with being aware, being vigilant, and trusting our gut. If something feels off, we have to be willing to admit that darkness exists inside of us, out in the world, and be able to, see those signs, the signs that maybe someone is struggling,
It's true. I mean, Cunanan, his behavior, it was clearly unstable, like his mind was just spiraling. And what if he had gotten help? Maybe this whole thing could have been prevented.
That's a really tough thought, isn't it?
Mm.
But it shows just how important it is to talk about mental health, to get rid of the stigma, to make sure people have access to resources to help. We need to create a world where people feel like they can ask for help, where they don't have to suffer alone, in silence.
Yeah, we need more empathy, more understanding. We need to get it through our heads that mental health is just as important as physical health, and that it's okay to not be okay sometimes.
Exactly. It's okay to ask for help.
As we're wrapping up this whole deep dive, I keep thinking about something you said earlier about true crime and how it draws us in. It's fascinating, it's scary, it makes you think, but how do we engage with it responsibly? With compassion for the victims and with the understanding that people aren't always so easy to categorize, good or bad. It's not always that simple.
It's true. It's easy to get caught up in the investigation, trying to solve the puzzle, trying to get inside the head of the criminal. But we have to remember that, real people were hurt. Real lives were lost. Families were broken. We can't forget that.
When we explore these dark parts of humanity, we have to do it with empathy. We have to try to understand, and we have to be willing to learn from the past so that, maybe we can make the future a little less dark.
Well said. I think that's a good place to wrap things up. But before we go, I want to leave you with something to think about. In a world where, we have all this information at our fingertips and true crime is everywhere, how do we balance, that desire to learn about these cases with the respect that the victims and their families deserve?
It's a good question, and I hope you'll keep exploring, keep asking those tough questions, and keep looking for those answers. Just, do it with an open mind, with a compassionate heart, and with a commitment to learning from what's happened before.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the life and crimes of Andrew Cunanan.
We'll see you next time for another journey into the depths of the human experience.